3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman I'll call Lila. At that time, I honestly believed she was the love of my life. Lila and I had been together for nearly 5 years, and our bond seemed strong. We were both lawyers, which meant we had demanding, fast-paced careers, but we always made it a priority to spend time together whenever possible. The year I proposed to Lila was supposed to be the happiest of our lives. But that same year, something I never expected happened. She lost her job. She was let go after breaking some company rules. I won't go into the details because it's personal, but the company fired her rather abruptly after what she did. If you've ever known a high-achieving workaholic, you might understand how a loss like that can really shake someone. For Lila, work wasn't just a paycheck. It was a core part of who she was, her pride, and her sense of purpose. Losing it so suddenly left her completely unmoored. Almost right away, Lila threw herself into the job search, sending out applications to dozens of firms and businesses. Unfortunately, her area of law was highly specialized and jobs were scarce, especially after the way her last position ended. Days turned to weeks, then months, and she still hadn't found anything new. During all of this, I tried my best to be supportive. I reassured her that she didn't need to worry about money. I saw it as my duty to look after her, especially since we were engaged. Knowing how Lila tended to obsess over problems and stress herself out, I encouraged her to relax and not let this setback eat away at her. Thankfully, she listened, or at least she tried to. With her new free time, she decided to chase a long-time dream, learning pottery. She signed up for a local pottery class and started spending her afternoons working on her craft. That pottery class was also the same one my brother Mason attended. Let me explain a little about Mason. He was nothing like me. While I was the responsible, studious one who focused on school and career, Mason was the classic troublemaker. He spent his school years joking around, getting into all kinds of mischief, and earning a reputation as a carefree playboy. That reputation followed him to college and beyond. He was the type who never settled down with anyone for long and rarely took life seriously. Lila met Mason early on in our relationship and always knew what he was like. So when she started going to the same pottery classes as Mason, I thought their crossing paths was just a fluke. But looking back, that's when everything started to change. In just a few weeks, they grew unexpectedly close. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mason offered to drive her to and from class sometimes, which was nice but unusual. Lila would come home, eager to share stories about her adventures with Mason at pottery class, or show me the things they'd made together. Before long, their time together went beyond just pottery. They began spending weekends together, going to art museums or trying out new restaurants. Things Lila and I used to do together, but now she was doing them with Mason. As time passed, it became impossible for me to ignore how much time she was spending with him, and it started to affect our relationship. She even began skipping date nights with me so she could hang out with him instead. I'm not someone who lets things build up without saying something, so one evening I decided to ask her directly. I looked her in the eye and asked if there was anything going on between her and Mason. Lila seemed genuinely shocked by my question. She was even offended. She immediately denied anything inappropriate and insisted that she and Mason were just friends. She said spending time with him was easy and fun, like hanging out with a younger brother. She looked truly hurt that I'd even think otherwise, and for a moment, I felt bad for doubting her. But deep down, her words didn't completely put my mind at ease. Everything reached a breaking point 2 months before our wedding. I was working day and night by then, trying to keep up with a heavy workload so I could make sure we were financially stable. Since Lila lost her job, I've covered nearly all our household expenses while she searches for work. She still draws on her savings when a personal cost or emergency pops up, but the day-to-day burden has fallen almost entirely on me. I was paying for everything, and the pressure of wedding planning on top of that made my work hours longer and more exhausting. I wasn't around as much as I should have been. And looking back, maybe that's what gave Lila and Mason the opportunity to get as close as they did. One night, I came home early from a business trip. I was excited to surprise Lila and spend some time with her. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed my brother's car parked out front. Normally, this wouldn't have bothered me. Mason was known for dropping by without warning, but it was already past 9 p.m, and seeing his car there that late sent a chill down my spine. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside quietly, I heard faint laughter echoing from inside. The living room was empty, though the TV was on, its flickering, light throwing shadows across the room. What caught my attention next were beer cans scattered on the floor, and then, unmistakably, Lila's clothes and underwear tossed carelessly among them. My stomach twisted. I knew immediately what I was about to find. A part of me wanted to turn and leave, but something inside me, something that needed undeniable proof, forced me forward. I had to see it with my own eyes. My heart pounding, I moved slowly toward the bedroom. At the doorway, I stopped. There they were, Lila and Mason, wrapped up in each other in the most intimate way possible. They were so lost in each other, they didn't even realize I was standing there. Normally, I'm a calm, level-headed person, but this was the deepest betrayal I could imagine. My fiancée, the woman I was set to marry in 2 months, was in my bed with my own brother. Without a word, I stepped into the room, walked up to the bed, and grabbed Mason by the back of the neck. I yanked his face away from Lila, and the shock on his face almost made it worth it. He looked at me, and his confusion instantly turned to terror. I didn't even look at Lila. Mason started mumbling apologies, but I couldn't care less about his words. I punched him square in the nose. The sharp crack of bone and the blood that started to stream down his face gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. He cried out in pain, but I wasn't finished. I hit him again and again, each blow landing harder than the last. Blood dripped from his nose onto his shirt, but I didn't care. He tried to shield himself, but my anger was unstoppable. When Mason was finally on the floor, bloody and begging for mercy, I turned to Lila. She was sitting on the bed, shaking and sobbing. I looked her in the eyes, and with a cold and steady voice, told her she had 10 minutes to get out of my house. I warned her that if she didn't, I wouldn't hesitate to leave her in the same condition as my brother. She started pleading, apologizing repeatedly, saying she could explain and begging me not to throw her out, that she just needed a chance to fix things. I wasn't interested in her explanations or her tears. I glanced at my watch and said flatly, "You've got 9 minutes left." My tone and the look in my eyes must have told her I was dead serious, because she scrambled off the bed and started getting dressed, her hands shaking as she cried. She grabbed a suitcase from the closet and packed whatever she could, tears streaming down her face. When she was finally done, dragging her half-filled suitcase down the stairs, she turned to me one last time. Her voice was weak and broken as she begged me to listen, insisting that she loved me and deserved a chance to explain. I didn't say a word. I reached for her hand, slid the engagement ring off her finger, and pushed her toward the door. She tried to resist, still pleading with me to reconsider, but I was finished. I opened the door and shoved her outside into the night. She stumbled onto the porch, still crying and shouting for forgiveness. I didn't even look back as I slammed the door shut, her sobs muffled on the other side. Mason was still bleeding from the beating. And while I was still boiling with anger, I didn't want to be responsible for something even worse happening to him. I called my parents and told them everything. My dad was furious with Mason, and my mom, though still in shock, promised they would come right away. The moment they arrived, she slipped into nurse mode and began tending to Mason's injuries. She cleaned and dressed his wounds, which, fortunately for him, were mostly superficial. Meanwhile, my dad pulled me out to the backyard, away from Mason. He could see my hands still shaking with anger, and I was barely keeping myself together. A little while later, Mason came outside with my mum. His face was bruised, his nose bandaged, and there were still streaks of blood on his shirt. He apologized for betraying me, insisting he hadn't intended for things to turn out this way. Then he dropped a bombshell. He claimed he was in love with Lila. I finally turned to face him, my glare like daggers. He kept talking, saying he believed Lila felt the same way. He said this was the first time they'd slept together, as if that made it any better. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me their messages, conversations full of flirty texts, secrets, and Lila confessing how unhappy she was with me. According to Mason, she was the one who invited him over that night because she thought I'd still be out of town for work. As I stood there reading those messages, my anger surged again. Mason kept apologizing, saying he'd never felt this way about anyone before, that he couldn't stop himself, and begged me to forgive him. His words just twisted the knife. My dad, who'd been listening in silence, finally exploded. He tore into Mason, telling him just how deeply he'd wronged me and how ashamed he should be. My mum, though, reacted differently. Mason had always been her favorite, and I could see her torn between us. She started telling me that no matter what I decided about Lila, I should forgive my brother. She claimed he seemed genuinely remorseful, as if that somehow made the betrayal easier to accept. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I cut her off and told both my parents I didn't want lectures or advice. The only thing I wanted was for them to take Mason and leave. I couldn't look at him any longer. My dad nodded, realizing I needed space, and helped Mason to the car. My mum hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and mediate, but eventually she followed. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with the emotional fallout from Lila's betrayal. Lila kept texting me, begging for forgiveness and trying to explain herself, but her excuses always sounded just like the ones Mason had already given me. She insisted she and Mason never meant to hurt me, but I ignored her messages for weeks. Then, out of nowhere, Mason called. He told me that he and Lila had just found out she was pregnant, and the baby was his. He said he wanted to marry her since she was carrying his child, and he asked for my blessing. I couldn't believe the nerve he had to ask me that after everything they'd done. My mother's reaction only made things worse. She'd already been trying to play peacemaker, but now she acted like Lila's pregnancy was some sort of miracle. She told me it was God's plan for Lila to get pregnant, and maybe Mason and Lila were always meant to be together. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. It was as if she was trying to justify the unimaginable, to excuse their actions because it fit into her new fantasy of being a grandmother. I told my mother, point blank, that I saw exactly what she was doing, and if she sided with Mason and Lila, our relationship would be over. I wasn't bluffing either. My brother's betrayal was already bad enough, but to have my own mother align herself with them was too much for me to accept. My father tried to stay neutral, hoping to ease the tension, but my mother offered Lila financial help, promising she and the baby would be well taken care of. But of course there was a catch. My mum insisted that Mason and Lila had to get married. This was what Mason wanted too. She was relentless, refusing to even consider the idea of her grandchild being born out of wedlock. When I heard Mason and Lila were forging ahead with the wedding, already mailing invitations to the whole family, fury and humiliation washed over me. Rather than start another fight, I honored my promise and cut both my mother and my brother out of my life. Mum, however, refused to accept my silence. For weeks after everything fell apart, she called non-stop, left countless voicemails, and even showed up at my door uninvited, always trying to guilt me into forgiving them. It was suffocating. That's when I realized the only way to truly escape her was to leave the city completely. 3 years have passed since I uprooted my life and moved away, cutting ties with almost everyone in my family, except for my dad. He respected my choice to leave and understood why I needed distance, though it saddened him that I didn't visit anymore. During those 3 years, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I didn't share my new number with anyone except my dad. I made new friends, found some sense of normalcy again, and worked hard to leave the past behind. So you can imagine my shock when Lila showed up at my doorstep yesterday, ringing my doorbell. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. Lila looked nothing like the woman I once loved. Her clothes were worn and faded, her face pale and thin, her hair dull and messy. She stood there clutching the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old. The child had Mason's sharp features, an undeniable sign of who her father was. For a moment, I was speechless. My mind raced with questions. Why was she here? How did she find me? What did she want? All the years I'd spent trying to forget her, and the pain she'd caused seemed to crash down around me. Finally, I broke the silence. "Lila, what are you doing here?" Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice trembled as she asked if they could come in because she had something important to discuss. My first instinct was to say no and send them away. But when I glanced down at the little girl, staring up at me with wide, innocent eyes, I couldn't bring myself to be harsh in front of her. I stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. I showed them to the couch and offered them water. Once they were settled, I sat across from them and asked what had brought them here. I already knew Lila couldn't have found me on her own. I had only given my address to my dad, and I trusted him to keep it private unless there was a real emergency. So what could be so important that he would give my location to her? Instead of answering right away, Lila reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it and immediately recognized my mum's handwriting. My stomach twisted as I read the letter. My mum wrote, in no uncertain terms, that it was my duty to clean up the mess Mason had made. She explained how Lila and Jesse were struggling, how Mason had abandoned them, and how, as Mason's brother and Jesse's uncle, I should step up and take care of them now. I looked up at Lila, confused and angry. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked, holding up the letter. That's when Lila broke down and finally told me the whole story. According to her, Mason had been unfaithful from the very start of their marriage, even after Lila gave birth to their daughter Jessie. My brother continued to cheat on her, on and off, the entire time they were together. Lila, for her part, tried to make the marriage work, hoping things would eventually get better for Jessie's sake if nothing else. But 3 months ago, Mason abruptly packed up and left. No warning, no note, just disappeared. Since then, Lila had been completely on her own. She had no job, no savings, and no home. She and Mason had been renting, and without him, she couldn't afford to stay. My mum, feeling a sense of duty toward Jessie, had been giving Lila money to support them. But now, with Mason gone for good, my mum decided she didn't want to be responsible for Lila and her child anymore. Lila went on to say that my mother wanted me to take care of her and Jessie since they had nowhere else to turn. I was disgusted by what she was asking. How could both Lila and my mum expect me to take on their mess? My mum had not only sided with Mason when everything first happened, but now she wanted to dump all the consequences of his actions onto me. It was infuriating, but not surprising. Mum's lifelong favoritism toward Mason left her blind to the wreckage he caused, and that blindness spilled over when she and Lila showed up expecting my help. In front of Lila's little girl, I told her, calm, firm, and without apology, that she had no right to ask anything of me. This wasn't my kid, she wasn't my fiancée anymore, and none of this was my responsibility. Even though I did feel sorry that Mason had abandoned her, she should have seen it coming. He was never reliable or trustworthy. I wasn't about to let guilt force me into helping, so I asked Lila to leave. When I said this, she started to cry, saying she had nowhere else to go, no money, and that whatever she had left had gone into gas just to get here. I ended up giving her a few $100s before asking her to leave. Since then, even though I know I did the right thing, I can't help but feel a bit guilty. I feel sorry for that poor kid. So, here's an update. I want to clarify a few things. My mum's behavior is just as confusing to me as it probably is to anyone reading this. The fact that she's trying to guilt me into helping Lila and her child after everything that's happened is incredibly selfish. I get that she probably feels obligated because Jessie is her grandchild, but that doesn't mean I should have to clean up after my brother's mess, especially after she completely ignored my feelings and sided with Mason during the betrayal. Her request just seems even more out of line. Some of your comments pointed out that my dad betrayed me too. Instead of offering me the support I needed after the affair, he stayed neutral. Even though he did yell at my brother that one time, he never truly took my side. By never standing up to my mum's manipulative behavior, he also played a part in this betrayal. I plan to talk to him about this soon. Lila may have been abandoned by Mason, but that doesn't automatically mean I have to take care of her. She made her own choices. Even though I can feel some sympathy for her situation, I don't owe her anything. The fact that she showed up at my door with nothing but a sad story and a child just highlights her desperation. Telling Lila to leave, but still giving her money, wasn't about spite. It was about setting boundaries. I made it clear that it's not my job to fix what Mason destroyed. I'm not required to help just because she's struggling now. No, that child isn't mine. Lila and I broke up weeks before she got pregnant, and by then we hadn't been intimate for quite a while. The timeline is clear. There's absolutely no way I'm the father. Plus, Jessie has all of Mason's features: her face, her eyes, her smile. It's like looking at a miniature version of him. I don't need a paternity test. The resemblance is too obvious. She's definitely Mason's child, and I refuse to let myself get dragged into more drama. And no, I do not want to adopt my niece. I can't believe some people are even suggesting it. No matter how tough things get for Lila, she's Jessie's mother, and it's her responsibility. I don't understand why she never got a job after marrying Mason, or why she didn't save any money. Mason is the father, so even if they split up, both Lila and Mason need to step up and care for their child. Mason is going to have to pay child support. He has no other option. I talked with my parents about everything. I already knew my dad was the one who gave Lila my address, but I wanted to hear it from him directly. I called and asked him, point blank, why he agreed to give her my location after I had told him not to, and what exactly he expected me to do for Lila and her child after all these years. My dad went quiet, clearly uncomfortable, then sighed and apologized. "I'm sorry, son. I really am," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We've tried everything we could to help Lila, but with Mason gone, we could only do so much. Your mum begged me to give her your address. She said maybe if you saw her after all this time, you'd want to help her in some way, since she has nowhere else to go." I could feel my frustration building and asked him why on earth he thought I'd help someone like her. She'd betrayed me with Mason, hurt me profoundly, and now Mason expected me to help her? I demanded to know why, and Dad said he understood exactly why I was so upset. He explained that neither he nor my mum wanted things to end up this way, but Lila and Jessie were still family to them, and he believed I was their only option. He apologized again, but I didn't listen. I told him he and I were finished. I had trusted him to be different from my mum, but it turned out they were all the same. Backstabbing traitors. Did they really think I'd somehow forget everything and just welcome Lila and my brother's child into my life, acting like nothing had happened and taking care of them? It was unbelievable how little my parents cared about me. I told my dad, firmly and without hesitation, to lose my number and forget I ever existed. Since he knew my address, I warned him that if either he or my mum ever showed up at my place, I'd call the police. My dad tried to apologize again, pleading with me to listen, but I wasn't interested anymore. My voice stayed steady, but the weight of my words filled the air. "Don't call me again," I said, cutting him off. "Just don't. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine." Without waiting for him to respond, I hung up and immediately blocked his number. What my dad did was unforgivable, and there's no going back from this. It's been almost a month since my last update. I was finally able to track down Mason with help from one of my buddies. Turns out, Lila was right. Mason had been living with his latest fling a few towns over, pretending like he had no responsibilities and no family. I couldn't believe this was the same guy who'd looked me in the eye and claimed he was in love with Lila 3 years ago, the same guy who'd flipped my entire world upside down. Now, after everything, he was shacked up with someone else, acting like he hadn't just abandoned his wife and child. It was infuriating, maddening even. How could someone be so selfish, so heartless? The fact that he could just walk away, treating his own flesh and blood like a minor inconvenience, made me sick. Once I found out where he was, I sent Lila his address. I didn't want to get pulled into any more of her drama, but I didn't want her to feel totally hopeless either. I gave her one last piece of advice. You need to hire a lawyer and file for divorce and child support. Do it now before Mason vanishes again. I also sent her some money, just enough to help her get by. Lila thanked me for everything, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She apologized again, just like she had so many times before, but I didn't care to hear it anymore. I told her I was done. I texted, "Don't ever contact me again. Don't show up at my door. This is the last thing I'm doing for you." Whatever we'd had was long gone. All I wanted now was for her to never disturb my peace again.